pleased and very proud, in fact, to introduce Nicole Livingston, OAM, as our guest speaker tonight. I've got a bit of a screed. Most of you will know a lot of the background, as we do. Career highlights and achievements, I'll come back to that perhaps. But Nicole Livingston began her swimming career at the age of 13 when she joined the Australian swimming team. She's one of Australia's most successful swimmers, notably in the field of backstroke, and has seen success on the international stage on numerous occasions. Nicole was in the Australian swimming team over 12 years between 1985 and 1996, representing Australia in 3 Olympic Games. In her Olympic debut in the 1998 Seoul Olympic Games, Nicole competed in the 100 metres and 200 metre backstroke, finishing 7th and 5th respectively. You ain't heard nothing yet. In her second Olympic appearance in the 1992 Barcelona Games, Nicole won a bronze medal in the 200 metre backstroke, breaking Australia's 44-year medal drought in women's backstroke. In her third and last Olympic appearance in 1996 in Atlanta, Nicole experienced her greatest success as she won silver in the 4x100 metre medley relay and a bronze in the 4x200 metre relay. In conjunction with her Olympic appearances, Nicole's efforts in the Commonwealth Games were outstanding. Her success included 6 gold medals, 2 silver and 1 bronze. Nicole also won 4 gold, 2 silver and 1 bronze in 6 appearances in the Pan-Pacific Championships. On a national level, Nicole remarkably defended 10 consecutive national backstroke titles between 1987 and 1996, a record that is still unbroken today. Nicole retired from her international swimming career in 1996. She was recognised for her incredible success through being awarded an Order of Australia in 1997, as well as Australian Sports Medal in 2000. Nicole is also a member of the Victorian Women's Honour. In 2016, Nicole was historically voted into the Carbine Club, and in 2017 was announced by the Victorian Government as Chair of the Victorian Institute of Sport. Upon retiring from swimming, Nicole began a long career in media in a variety of roles. She provides sports commentary at events such as Olympic and Commonwealth Games, as well as hosting shows across several broadcasting stations, including Wide World of Sport, Any Given Sunday and The Project. In 2017, Nicole was announced as the AFL's head of women's football, which includes the responsibility for delivering the AFLW competition. Nicole is a mother to 3. And along with her sister, Karen Livingston, founded Ovarian Cancer Australia after their mother sadly passed away from the disease. She is now patron of the organisation and is also a director of Australian Swimming. Gentlemen, would you welcome Nicole Livingston?
Cool. I do prove that you don't have to be from Queensland to be a swimmer. Quite a regular theme. But I want to take you through first and foremost my moment in life where everything went according to plan. This is the final of the 200 metres backstroke at the Barcelona Olympic Games, 1992. That is me, second from the bottom of the screen, in lane number 2. I had worked well and truly over 10 years for this moment in time that took just over 2 minutes in totality. 30 hours of training, week in, week out, over 100 kilometres a week. For this moment that takes 2 minutes in time. 48 weeks a year, and I did that for 16 years in total as an Olympic swimmer. Now from my point of view with this race, July 31, 1992 at 10 minutes past 8. One event after Kieran Perkins' 1500, the race that stopped the nation. Nobody watched this race, that's why I've got it on video. I was racing against a lady by the name of Christina Egazeki here out in front. Christina, at 14, won her first Olympic Games gold medal. She's from Hungary. And went on to be the first swimmer since Dawn Fraser to win 3 consecutive Olympic Games gold medals in this event, the 200 metres backstroke. It's a pretty tricky sport, one of only 3 in Olympic history that go backwards. We'll talk about those a little later, maybe I'll do a bit of a trivia competition. But this is the money lap. This is the 3rd lap of 4. So right now you're having a little bit of self-doubt, you start to feel a little fatigued. But for me, this is where I kicked into my own. So my second half of my race was always better than my first. I'm right beside this swimmer, Dagmar Hauser from Germany, who had won a gold medal a little earlier in the competition in a freestyle event. And I knew that Lee Lovelace across here, because I'd studied the race and how they swam, I knew Lee Lovelace was going to fatigue. So if I could just put my foot down in this last final moments, I had a chance of being able to win an Olympic medal, which is what I dreamed about as a little girl. Let's just have a look at the final moments. This is me here in this lane. So that was a bronze medal at the Olympics. And so as a little girl, I dreamt about this. I watched the 1980 Moscow Olympic Games beamed into Mum and Dad's lounge room in Parkdale, all the way from the USSR, and I thought that it was a world away. And how could Australians possibly be able to go all that way and be able to not only perform on the international stage, but to be able to stand on a victory dais? This was a long time ago, 1992, 27 years ago, but it feels like it was yesterday. Yes, it was probably 20 kilos ago as well, but it does feel like it's yesterday. I can feel the race, I can see it in slow motion, I can see the Australian support up there in the audience, and I reckon that everybody in life deserves a moment in time where they've worked exceptionally hard, they'd had a great plan, and they put it in place, and you were able to execute to perfection. And for me, that was it. That was the moment in time that everything went in slow motion and well and truly according to plan. I was very fortunate to be able to go to 3 Olympic Games and represent Australia in a sport that really does have a great effect on our nation. If Australian swimmers are doing well, then we have a spring in our step. If the Australian swimming team's not doing so well, then we feel a bit miserable about ourselves every 2 years at either Olympics or Commonwealth Games. But it was at that time as a 9-year-old that I dreamt about going to those games because I saw it. I could see what I wanted to be. And I'll talk a little more about Australian football and women in Australian football in a moment. But what I didn't account for was the fact that in my early days, we had permission to be female athletes. We had permission to be able to try our best, to be able to train hard, and everything on offer for us as female athletes was also on offer for male athletes as well. It is a complete sport of equality. And in fact, if you look at the female performances at the Olympic Games from our Australian swimmers, we have been punching well above our weight for many years, and in fact probably doing better than a lot of the blokes at the Olympic arena. So if you think about something like track and field, Australian women have won 80% of our gold medals in track and field. You know some of those amazing legends like Marjorie Jackson, now Marjorie Nelson, Shirley Strickland, who's no longer with us, and Betty Cuthbert, those kind of amazing female athletes that were trailblazers before their time, set the scene for female athletes to be able to go to the Olympic Games and to participate. I was pretty lucky to have some great leadership as a young girl as well, women and men that inspired me to be able to dream big and not put any barriers in place. This is my little primary school swimming team, the Parktone Primary Swimming Team, nestled between Parkdale and Mentone. And within this swimming team, there are 2 Olympians. This is me in the front, maybe channeling my inner Queenslander wearing maroon coloured bathers, not sure why. And this is Lindley Frame. We grew up 2 streets apart from each other and both went to the same Olympic Games in 1992. So Lindley and I both started as freestylers, raced against each other for many years, and then I went off to backstroke and she went off to breaststroke, and then eventually we formed the first half of the medley relay team, me doing backstroke and Lindley doing breaststroke. So again, proving you don't have to be from Queensland, and what a powerful little swimming team that was. But our primary school sports teacher there in that photo did inspire us to dream big and not to see any of those barriers. Here's my old mate, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, He founded the Olympic Games, the modern Olympic Games. He made a decision with some of his friends in 1894 to recommence the modern Olympic Games. And in 1896 in Athens, those games commenced. The Baron's views on women competing in the Olympic Games was very strong. There was no thought process of women being involved in the Olympic Games. And in fact, his thought about women's role and women's involvement in the Olympic Games, he was quoted as saying that a woman's best role is to make sure that her son is ready to compete well at the Olympic Games. So fair to say they didn't have a thought process. But by 1900, the second Olympic Games, women's sport was introduced. Much more ladylike sports like golf and tennis. And that was a very small percentage of the overall participation, about 2%. In those 1900 games were women. It has grown over the years. There was very much a fight, though, to get women swimming into the Olympic Games. Now, this is 1912. This is probably about 1910, actually. This is Sarah Fanny Durack and Nina Wiley. There's always been a need for trailblazers, for fighters, and for firsts when it comes to women in sport. And these two ladies were determined to make sure that when the opportunity came up that swimming was added to the Olympic Games for 1912, that they would be a part of it. They were keeping world rankings back in those days, keeping abreast of everybody's times, probably by telegram, more than computer systems, obviously. But Nina Wiley and Sarah Fanny Durack were leaders in the world when it came to the 100 metres freestyle. And despite the International Olympic Committee announcing that women's swimming would be added to those Olympic Games, the Australian Olympic team was announced without any female swimmers. And the way that they justified that was that there was no room in the budget for them after paying for all of the male team to be selected and go off to the 1912 Olympic Games. Now, there was public outrage, there was a national scandal around this, and eventually petitions were signed, fundraisers took place, and Sarah and Nina were added to the Olympic roster. There was a bit of a mix in terms of thought process back in that period of time in terms of women being involved in swimming. We all know the Brighton baths and we know the beach boxes. It was a period of time where private bathing hours for ladies were in place. And there was a general view that if ladies were participating in something like swimming, then they weren't setting themselves up to be their best wives or the best mothers. And also that perhaps you blokes couldn't be trusted with women wandering around in their swimsuits. After all, they are showing their shoulders and their knees at one time. So they got off to the Olympic Games in 1912, and this is actually a photo from the 1912 Olympic final, courtesy of Harry Gordon, who was the Olympic historian. This is part of his Australians in the Olympics book. It's a basin filled with lake water. The starting blocks was a floating pontoon at the end of the 50-yard course. No goggles, no caps, and certainly no lane ropes to show them where they were going. And just remember that was a lake that was in that water, no chlorination. There were wool swimming costumes. Just have a think about how they would have smelt and how you would have got them dry. But Sarah Fanny Durack led from start to finish. She swam a time of 1 minute and 12 seconds for the 100 yards freestyle. Kate Campbell currently swims 52 seconds, all these years later. So Sarah Fanny Durack was a gun back in those days. So she led from start to finish, won Australia's first Olympic Games gold medal for a female, and there was a ding-dong battle with Nina Wiley to try to take the silver medal. She was racing against a swimmer from Great Britain. She actually went crooked and hit the edge of the basin at one stage in her 100-yard freestyle, found her direction again and ended up powering home to take the silver medal. So starting that infamous golden rule in sport, you don't finish last and you don't get beaten by a pom to take out that silver medal. So thankfully, because of these women, I'm able to stand in front of you as an Australian female Olympic swimmer. They fought for it, and they fought hard, and they fought gallantly. And by the time I started my swimming career, I took it for granted. We didn't see any barriers, myself or those that I swam with or that I looked up to, no barriers whatsoever. But in watching the Olympic Games in 1980 as a young girl, I was able to, as I said, see what I wanted to be. I wanted to be just like Lisa Forrest, who was our Australian backstroke swimmer at those 1980 Olympic Games. And backstroke was the stroke that I loved. It's a stroke that you get to keep going with your conversations if you want to. You can talk. My mum always told me I could talk underwater. But you also don't have to worry about when to breathe. So backstroke was always the stroke that I loved. And to be able to get to those Olympic Games as a 17-year-old and then to do it again as a 21-year-old and to stand on the victory dais at the Olympic Games is an absolute highlight. But there's so much more that goes on behind the scenes. Clearly, those 100 kilometres a week that we were doing, week in, week out, all of the other dry land training that we were doing, there's a whole team in place to be able to get you to that one moment in time that lasts, for me, 2 minutes. The other race that I participated in lasted for 1 minute. Now, while I was pursuing my swimming career, I was probably blissfully unaware that there was this fight going on behind the scenes. Eventually it would become a very public fight for girls and women to be allowed to play Australian football, something that they were passionate about. The first recorded game of Australian football here for women was in 1915. And we know that in 1939 or 1941, I think it was, there was a crowd of over 40,000 that turned up to watch women play football over in Adelaide. It was a little, the guys were off at war and the women started playing sport, a little like the movie, if you've seen it, A League of Their Own with Gina Davies. So over 40,000 turned up to watch Australian women play the local Indigenous game. And when they first turned out, they were wearing some pretty cumbersome gear. I don't know how they kept that bonnet on their head and how they were able to take a specky in those dresses, but this was what they started doing. But as it evolved, part of the issue was that very much recognised as a boys' sport, a men's sport. And girls were not offered a pathway past 12 years of age. And there is a very public case of 3 young players coming forward and taking it to court, a sex discrimination case, that girls had to stop Australian football at 12 and weren't able to pursue it past that. And this case won, and the girls were allowed to continue to play until 15 years of age. Still, 15 was better than 12, but it wasn't long enough to be able to give them the opportunity to pursue it with any vigour past that age. But that court case was the reason why the Victorian Football League, the VFL at that stage, started female participation and female pathways and a female competition. We fast forward to 2015. And Gil McLachlan announced in 2015 that the National Women's Football League would be commencing in 2017. So originally it was planned behind the scenes for 2020. So in fact, if we think about everything that we have achieved in the last 3 years, we're still not born. We're premature at the moment in terms of our birth year and birth date, but 2020 was when we were meant to be starting. So 2017 was the first game of AFLW, and this is the opening bounce from that first game. Carlton versus Collingwood at Princess Park. Forever it will be Princess Park for me. And I think the game was originally scheduled for Olympic Park, an oval that had no infrastructure, that was a warm-up track for the guys for Collingwood. And then they started to get some registrations of people intending to come along to the game. And they realised very quickly that once it was about 2,000 people saying that they were going to come and have a look at this first opening game, that they needed to move the competition to a bigger ground. So they moved to Princess Park, a venue that holds about 24,000, although I have heard varying accounts of how many people turned up that night, but still with about half an hour to go, the stadiums were looking pretty empty. And then in that final half an hour, all of the trams started to arrive from the western suburbs of Melbourne, and a new crowd came out. And they're a crowd that have never followed football. They don't actively follow the AFL necessarily, but they knew that this was a defining moment for women to be able to play elite football in a competition that was enabled and organised by the Australian Football League. And very quickly we realised that there wasn't going to be enough seats for everybody. The gates were shut. Over 24,000 people watched that inaugural game of AFLW. And I don't want to say the rest is history, because we have a long way to go on this journey and a long way to go to get to our final destination. In 2019, we added 2 further teams to our inaugural 8 teams. We had the foundation licences that were given out, and then in 2019 we added Geelong and we added North Melbourne. This is a photograph from the opening game at GMHBA Stadium at Cardinia Park in Geelong. I love this photo. The reason I love it is that not only are there young girls wearing their club guernseys, being excited by seeing female footballers, because now they can see who they want to be, but I look at the young boys in this photo that are reaching out, trying to grab a hold of an AFLW player, and I look at the dads. I'm not sure he thought he was going to be captured in that shirt or that hat, but I look at the dads who are now involved in this. So at one small bleating moment they may have thought, oh damn, it's a girl, not a boy, I won't get to see them play footy. Now we have a generation of dads coming out, having pride in their daughters that are now participating in Australian football. It's pretty incredible, the transformation that has happened. If you think about the AFL has been an industry that has thought about one product for about 150 years, and that one product has been men's football. So for an organisation to have to become agile and to have to change the way that it operates, it has been both challenging and it has both been challenging and an opportunity. How often does a business get a chance to diversify in the way that it's diversifying with women's football coming into the fold? I talked a little bit about to welcome a whole new audience. Those cool cats that got off the tram from the western suburbs of Melbourne that have never followed the AFL wholeheartedly follow the AFLW. And what we know about our audience is that 94% of them feel better about the AFL because of what is going on with the AFLW. So it is an opportunity for the AFL to have more fans come to the game. And if they are following women's football and they fall in love with their club, they're also likely to follow the men's side of the game as well. So they become fans of the AFL. So it makes sense. It's not only the right thing to do, but it's also a good thing for the industry to do. 30% of our fans are new to the game, as I said. We have incredible players that, unlike the men, are having to develop their skills and to develop the game of Australian football for women under the media spotlight and under the social media spotlight, which is a world that is very difficult to navigate and quite often opinionated, and the filter of nicety is not always there. So the guys have been able to develop their football skills, and in fact our AFLW scores are very similar to the VFL scores as the league started in all of those years ago, over 100 years ago. So the players are having to develop these skills in front of a glaring audience that are getting used to seeing girls play footy. One of the other areas that I find quite often people ask me about is the injury rate. Yes, women are probably more susceptible to doing their ACL than men because of the way that our bodies are formed. Potentially, concussions. There could be increased risk for a female with concussion playing a contact sport like football because of neck strength. But we are working our way through research with that. So research to try to put in preventative programs to be able to strengthen knees, to be able to strengthen necks, and also programs to be able to help the players with correct technique. One of the big advocates in this area was Danny Frawley. Danny Frawley features in our program called Prep to Play, which is getting not only community footballers but also elite footballers ready with appropriate skills to protect themselves and to know how to give and take a tackle, to know how to get down on the ground and get the ball and protect your head. So Danny was very passionate about making sure that the women that were playing were also having correct technique. That will evolve with time as we have players coming right through our system with the Oz kick right through to the elite game, we will have the same kind of intrinsic skills. It's just going to take some time to get there. Erin Phillips is one of our most outstanding players. We've got a lot of players coming from cross-code as well, so they've come from other sports. Some of them are prolonging their sporting careers. We've got another player with the Adelaide Crows, Jess Foley, who's represented Australia in basketball. She's an opal, and she's now well and truly into this premiership team of the Crows as a ruck. So a lot of players coming back to the game, a lot of players coming from other sports. And we are starting to see our first girls that have gone right through the system from Auskick into the elite game. We have 4 more teams joining the competition in 2020. So it takes our total to 14. It also takes our total from a player point of view to 420 players inside professional sporting organisations, wearing their club Guernseys with pride and inspiring a nation. And it's not just about the on-field side of things. As we look at Taylor Harris mid-flight, you've heard about this photo, I would think. So I look at that photo and I see an athlete in full flight. I see an athletic, flexible, my hamstring hurts looking at that photo, flexible athlete, maybe with a unique technique, but it's one that works for her, letting loose on a ball that travels 45 metres and goes through the big sticks in the middle. It was a goal. The thought process that anything more should have been said about this photo was not appropriate. And it got us to a point where people started to actually call out that behaviour online and in public. So I'm proud of the fact that this moment in the AFLW has actually started to get us to think about how we deal with each other as people, and the niceties and the manners and a positive thought process that should actually be there. Unconscious bias is one thing that we do deal with quite a bit. So for all of you, if you do get the opportunity to talk about women's football, don't talk about the fact that they're not as good as the guys. This is women's football. It's a different game. Think about the opportunity that this presents for your daughters, for your granddaughters, and for future generations. It is changing the scape as well, off the field. Women are getting more opportunity when it comes to being involved in football clubs, being at the selectors table, having roles on committees. 51% of our community in Australia are females. So it's the right thing to do as well, to give them the opportunity both on and off the field. We broke that record from the 1940s. We had 53,034 come to our AFLW Grand Final over in South Australia. It was the Crows versus my team, Carlton. Didn't quite get there in the final, Carlton, but I have to say that the Adelaide Crows, being in a footy state, a one-team town, they are pretty dominant. But the fact that we had this level of audience come along is quite incredible. Now, lots of people say to me, yeah, but they didn't have to buy a ticket. This was on TV. They could have just sat at home in their couch and kept their mockies on, because we are talking about South Australia, or their ruggies. But they had to actually come out the door. They had to bring their kids. And as I wandered through this crowd and wandered through some other crowds in South Australia to see the guys in their singlets with their tats and their beards, with their tinnies at the footy, watching girls football, I realised that this is a game for everybody, and people are starting to get lost in the romance of seeing their footy team on the field and seeing the Guernseys, and not necessarily seeing the gender, which is really our end game, to actually see high performers, to see athletes, to see players playing Australian football that they love. But it gives you a little bit of the data on AFLW. It was a record-breaking season. We have 420 players next year. Our highest ever attendance, 244,000 people came to AFLW games in the season. We have a new brand position which is called Gen W. You are all Gen W, because I want you supporting a generation of women. We are very digital. It is the new age. We've got a great app. We're the only female sport that has their own app and their own website. TV audiences are up. Lots of followers that are really engaged in social media. Email subscribers, I mean, to get people to open emails these days is really difficult. Our crowds and our fans are really engaged in this side of things. From a media point of view, over 45,000 media articles about women's football. And that attendance is something that we're really proud of. 480,000 people sat down and watched on the tally as well. So it has been quite incredible. I'll just run you through a couple of the stats. So again, that's the overall stats from the 2019 season. So 4.35 million AFLW fans. That's Nielsen Sport that provides that with us, so for us. 4.2 million cumulative broadcast audience, so people are watching this football. 300 players, 244,000 in terms of the attendance. Club memberships are up, so again, driving that club membership side of things for what has always been men's clubs. And this is our growth. So I talked about 2015, the announcement by Gill. The growth since that time has been just incredible. So 32% of all participation in Australian football now is made up by women and girls. It really is quite incredible. That's Auskick, schools. We have an AFL Nines competition throughout the northern states, so New South Wales and Queensland. But look at this, I mean, South Australia is a footy state. This is 32% growth in women playing football in South Australia. Really quite incredible. From a Victorian point of view, 17.7 year-on-year growth and club participation on track to double, so up 87%. And interestingly with that, probably pertinent to us in this local area and right around the nation, is that 100 plus new ovals will be needed in the next 5 years. So thinking about that from a facility point of view. Tassie's almost at 11% growth. And the northern markets that have never really been our place, Queensland and New South Wales, have really taken off. We've got girls from private girls' schools now choosing Australian football as the sport that they want to play. We've got a primary school girls' competition in New South Wales and the ACT. And Queensland, that's always been rugby league and rugby union heartland, is now very much an opportunity for girls to play Australian football. And just the final one, looking at the growth over the period of time. In 2014, it was about 194,000, so just shy of 200,000 women and girls participating. And now moving into 2018, we're at 530,000. It's more than just 530,000 women and girls playing footy at footy clubs around the nation, or at schools, or at local Auskick centres. This is about opportunity for women. It's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. So I look out and I see a sea of men. When you do get the opportunity to talk about women's football, please make sure that you do it with a little bit of TLC and a little bit of empathy as to what we're trying to do, which is create opportunity for girls to do something that they love, that they're passionate with. And I know that the other thing is, I'm just going to touch on the injury side of things, the other thing that I hear all the time is, oh, well, the girls, I don't feel comfortable about the girls getting injured. We're doing lots of studies at the moment. We're doing a study in an emergency departments in the greater Geelong area to see whether or not that actually is true, that girls get more injured than boys playing Australian football. At the moment, that is not coming through. And the injuries that we're seeing are more finger related, so trying to get the girls to understand that when they're going for the ball they have to graze past the grass and get their fingers under the ball, but those things will happen with time. The girls like playing Australian football for a few reasons. We've talked to lots of them. They like it because the barriers have gone. They like it because it's a bit of risk taking. They haven't been able to do that previously. And they also like it because of the physicality. It's not like netball, where there's meant to be non-contact and there's boundaries. They actually get to do a little bit of the rough and tumble, which they haven't had the opportunity to do before. Thank you for letting me come and chat to you for a little while about Australian football and my background. I am happy to take some questions if you would like to do some questions, Simon. That's up to you. But yeah, I think you'll see a lot more of it. Have you started to notice it as you walk around Bayside or as you drive around Bayside? I came out of Woolies on Bluff Road down in Black Rock the other day, and I paused before coming out because I heard a footy being bounced. I thought, I don't want to get collected by the footy coming through. It was a dad and his daughter. She was dressed in her footy kit, bouncing the footy on the way up the street, up Bluff Road. So it's happening more and more. Embrace it. Don't fight it. We're here and we're here to stay, and it's only going to get bigger and better. Thank you.
What an absolutely outstanding presenter, and highly professional and highly regarded, with a wonderful background. You talked about it taking you investing 10 years for 2 minutes. That's something that we really need to hang on to, especially for our grandkids' point of view. If you want to get somewhere, it's a nice little paraphrase. You fixed up the Queenslanders in the beginning, and you've done the Poms. You had a reasonable smack at South Australia. I remember at a lunch with some gents years ago, we were sitting around and we were talking about where we're from. And we said to this guy, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm from Adelaide." And somebody said, "Why?" So it's wonderful to hear you, Nicole. Really, it was first class, and we're very happy to invite questions. Ken Beatle's got one straight away.
Nicole, I have 2 granddaughters who've been playing in junior football this year. One who's a 13-year-old playing at Richmond, and another one who's 15 playing at St Kilda. They're playing in clubs there, but they're not playing at school.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you're doing to get the schools playing it as a school sport.
Yeah. So there is a school competition, School Sport Victoria. We meet very regularly with them and School Sport Australia. We've just aligned the age categories for School Sport Australia for Australian football for girls to complement everything that we're doing, because they were a little bit out of whack. So we work really well with them. So we do give them a small amount of funding as well. School footy is around, but unfortunately one of the issues with the facilities is, particularly private girls' schools, is when they were built in the 1900s, girls were catered for in the home ec room, but not in the sporting field. So a lot of those schools do not have ovals, particularly in that kind of Malvern precinct. Many of them don't have any ovals at all, so they have to go out and use the local government authority or the local council facilities. So that makes it difficult for everybody to coexist. But private schools are now offering scholarships for outstanding young Australian footballers that are female, so it really is starting to kick up. If you've seen the Beau Morris High School redevelopment with the MCC being involved, that actually has a female football program there as well, which is going great guns. So, but the program that you're referring to at the Saints, if she's 15, she's maybe in the under 16 academy with the Saints. That's a program that we're funding. So we've put $10 million into talent pathways around the nation over the next 4 years to try to develop Australian footballers with opportunity. And part of that is the under 16 academy at all 18 clubs, and that's a great program. The Saints are doing really well with that.
Nicole, thank you very much for your very professional presentation, and particularly the impressive figures that you had on the screen. I wonder at what point will there be some pressure on the AFLW to charge people to come and see, and what difference that'll make? It's
a good question. I don't think it's going to be the panacea of bringing in revenue or commerciality that everybody thinks it will be. Right now, a lot of our audience are new to Australian football, so we don't want to put any barriers on them at the moment with charging. So the AFL pays for everything, just so that we're clear on that as well. So we pay all of the player payments, the match day costs, the travel of the teams. Each of the clubs have an amount that they have set aside to pay for staffing of the programs that run, but the AFL is investing heavily in this. So we're looking at it at the moment, looking at maybe doing some little pilot test cases on when we can actually see whether people would be happy to pay. Similar to what cricket has done with the WBBL. They had a couple of clubs that ran some pilots with charging last year, and I think they got crowds of about 4,000 or 5,000 that turned up. So we're watching it, But at the moment, we want to make sure there's no barriers for families to come to our football matches. We call it free range footy. It's gone back to the suburbs. And the kids don't have to be stuck in the seats. They can actually run around on the hill like we used to when we were little kids. So we want to make sure there's no barriers still in place. But we are looking at it.
Just as we went to the footy grand final.
Tony, just a minute.
Tony.
I'm coming to you next, Tony.
Nicole, I'm Bruce Tompkins. Thank you for your talk. It was very good.
Are you James's dad?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So my daughter goes to school with your granddaughters. Yeah. It's a small world. I saw Bridget at Parent Teacher Night last week.
Well, two of James's girls have played ladies football and enjoyed it thoroughly.
And I'm happy about that.
They also play basketball
They do, yeah.
like idiots. And one thing I'm worried about though with the women playing Australian rules is the injury aspect, particularly necks and legs, as you said.
Yeah.
Of course, basketball is supposed to be a non-contact sport. There is contact. In fact, they played in the grand final last Friday night, and they played against a team from Coburg who tended to use their elbows.
They're a bit handsy, were they?
Very. And one girl, one of our granddaughters, came off hardly able to breathe because she'd been hit in the ribs. But is there much going on in the way of studies? I mean, you mentioned it briefly about neck, head injuries, leg injuries. I worry about ladies playing football.
And it's really interesting because we watch our guys play footy or we watch our guys play basketball, and if they get injured, it's kind of like, oh, they just got injured. So it's also a society change as well, that these are athletes that know what they're getting into, that love the fact that they're playing the sport that they are passionate about. So you've got to balance that as well, that we're actually comfortable and okay with the guys getting injured. And it's just a blip on the game, and they'll be back in however the period of time. But basketball, I agree with you, that's meant to be non-contact, but it is a very physical game, and your likelihood of doing an ACL playing basketball or playing Australian football or playing netball is pretty much all the same. Because from a female point of view, the way our bodies are, we are more susceptible to a knee injury in playing a sport that you twist and pivot. So we have our Prep to Play series that looks at aerial contests, so the way that you take off into the air and the way that you land, to try and minimise that, because there are some things that we know about ACLs in particular, or knee injuries, that will make you even more susceptible in terms of motions that you would put into place in football. So we want to get those out of the game so players are actually educated. We also know that we can't completely prevent injury, but we can reduce injury by appropriate exercises, building up areas of your knee or your neck. So our Prep to Play series also has all of that information, and we've changed all of our coaching accreditation training, so it actually incorporates also coaching females. So coaches should find that as a pretty easy resource. But it's about us getting comfortable that the girls actually like the fact that it's a physical game, that they actually do get to make contact, because all of these other games they're not supposed to make contact. So it's also balancing our comfortability with that. Erin Phillips, who I showed on screen, she did her ACL in the grand final. She did an ACL playing basketball for Australia years before that, and she's been rehabbing consistently her knee since April, and I think she'll be pretty close to being back for the first game next year. So these are professional athletes that are surrounded by experts as well. So you've got to be okay with it. The chances of getting injured are less likely than happening, but we just need to prepare ourselves that it can happen. Tony?
Yes, just talking about going to see grand finals. We went to two. Both our grandchildren were in different grand finals. But we had to pay $10 each to get into the ground.
Was that a VFL grand final?
No, this is under 18s and under 17s. Now the first game was played at in Sandringham, at the main oval there, and that was $10 each
Yeah.
for seniors, and the other was played, I don't know which council it was in, but that was $5 for a cart, $15 each, reduced to 10 for
Yeah.
elderly people. But I just wonder whether they, all the money they get, do you get any of that back, or where does it go?
No,
Because
we don't get a clip. We don't get a clip of any of that. I know David quite well that runs the Sandringham Zebras, so they obviously have their own costs. They're trying to get into the VFLW or at least have an elite team. So, you know, it's up to them if they would like to charge entry at the door. But yeah, that goes back into their development of football. So yeah, so the VFLW and the VFL Grand Final takes place next week, or this weekend, and that will also be a charge at the gate. So again, that goes back into football programming. I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure from an AFLW point of view, we don't have any barriers with people that are new to the game considering Australian football. But if we're going into suburban clubs and they're trying to make some money to actually fundraise for their clubs, then I'm okay with that, because they're all running on the smell of an oily rag. But the AFL doesn't get a clip of that. Yeah. And even with the growth of 530,000 women playing footy now, I come from a sport where, and James's rowing is the same, that for every new member, the National Association and the State Association gets a little clip. That doesn't happen in Australian football. So for 530 new or women playing, we don't see any of that income. It goes into the local leagues and the local clubs.
It will happen.
Roger Wilson, OAM, has a question.
So we're swim with Barcelona, magnificent. I've got a couple of comments first.
Yep.
I've got a 15-year-old who's played under 15 grand final, and she also went into the under 18 grand final, which really worried us, but anyway, she didn't get injured. But she is 6 foot and she towers up.
Is she a ruck? Is she playing in ruck? Yeah, nice.
And down at Old Brighton, which I'm connected with at the football club,
Yeah, right.
where we've got, we're in A grade, we have more people watching the girls' game afterwards under lights than we do the boys.
Yep.
Question I've got is, when do you see the grand final at the MCG with the women's playing with 100,000?
I actually, good question. I actually sat next to Katie Brennan, who was playing for the Bulldogs. She's making a debut for Richmond next year, at the grand final last year for the men, and she actually whispered to me, "When do you think you'll see us here?" And at that point in time, I thought, actually, it's a long way off. But then we had a crowd of 53,000 come to Adelaide Oval. So it makes me think it's actually not that far away. So we've got 14 clubs in the league next year. We haven't shied away from the fact that we do have an aspirational target of all 18 clubs having a women's team from an equality point of view. And there are some complexities with that in terms of having double headers or curtain raisers or post-game for the women. Just you think about, most of the men's venues are pretty close to sold out. So if we wanted to do a double header, say with Geelong at GMHBA Stadium, where the men and women play together, it's already sold out for the men's members. So we just need to be considerate in that. We had pressure of bringing our fans into Adelaide Oval on the day before, the Saturday, when Port Adelaide were playing. I'll bring them in, you know, they can play at the back end of that. Could you imagine opening the gates at 3/4 time to a men's crowd, the amount of booze that's taken place for our families to come in? So we just need to be really considerate that we're not, that the choices that we make are well thought out, and they're actually thinking about our fans as well. I'd like to see them at the MCG though, that'd be good. Not many venues have enough change rooms as well. So even Marvel Stadium doesn't have enough change rooms to have double headers. You need 4 change rooms clearly. MCG, you know, they would be able to host a double header, but it makes it a little bit more difficult.
What about the day after the grand final?
I think Robert has a question, and it'll be something to do with POMs, I suspect.
First of all, I was going to say, I'm not a POM.
No, not with that accent.
It used to
I do sport Carlton. My daughter played rugby for Scotland.
Yeah.
And it was the 56 Commonwealth Games in Cardiff that inspired me to take up swimming.
Yeah, nice.
And it was the Conrads that I remember from
John Nelson.
the time in Australia. They were very good. I still hear some criticism that next year's season isn't really complete in terms of a variety of things. Perhaps you'd like to just comment on that.
So our competition, again, we want to actually create a unique competition for AFLW that is bespoke. We don't want to have exactly the same as the men and copy what they've done. I think we can learn from some of their mistakes. And the other thing with the AFL is that because it's been around for a really long time, it's really hard for them to innovate and make changes. The amount of furor about making the simplest of changes and debate and discussion. So because we are brand new, we have the opportunity to set it up the way that we would like to set it up for AFLW. So we do operate in conferences. We brought that in last year. Conferences will be back in again in 2020. Conferences aren't new to Australian sport. And in fact, the VFL, when it started, guess what? It was in conferences. So it's not new to Australian football either, but all throughout America, conferences run successfully through the UK as well. But it's just getting people out of their comfort zone. But as we're building the league, I mentioned to you a little earlier that the AFL is investing and paying for everything. We're also paying match day costs. So per round, it's about $1 million. So as we think about bringing more players into the league, more clubs into the league, and we're paying all of those as well to be professional athletes, we have to consider what it means to add more rounds. And where our investment goes, is it on adding more rounds to AFLW? Is it putting more money into talent pathways? Is it community? So right now, and also our audience, once the men's sport starts, our audience trails away, which is why at the moment we've kept it shorter in terms of a short, sharp season that gives us really good commercial value when we talk to sponsors and we talk to prospective sponsors and we show them our data. Our data is strong on that shorter season. But then once the men's season starts, our viewing audiences drop away. We're on secondary channels. It's actually really difficult. But, you know, there's a few things that I am proud of. I'm proud of the fact that we are the only women's sport that has all of their games shown on free-to-air TV or on TV. That's actually really difficult. We're not paying to put it on there. They're paying us to have AFLW. I mentioned to you before, we're the only female sport that's got their own website, their own app, that's actually encouraging people to learn more about our sport and more about our players. So again, I mentioned earlier, we're not at our final destination. It's going to take us some time to build this. But mix it in there with the impatience, which is human nature, of I want everything right now, and a generation of footballers that have waited a really long time that now see that it's here and they want their opportunity. We need to think about what's best for the league.
What about the payment to the players? They're still relatively low compared to some of the other ladies' sports?
No, not compared to the other female sports. Pretty comparative. Cricket is probably the only one that's separate to that. And the way that cricket's done it is they've wrapped up multiple representation, so state league, national duties and WBBL into an overall playing contract. So we don't have the green and gold that adds that extra layer. The top payment, we've got a negotiation happening at the moment. By the third year of this current offer of contract, for an 11-week season, the top payment is about just under $37,000. So it's getting there. It's not the same as the men's, but the men are making a profit right now. We're not making a profit. Yeah.
Robert, my apology for misrepresenting you.
That's all right.
Barry Amon.
Nicole, thank you very much. You mentioned the lack of ovals. This is an increasing problem as we become the population becomes more concentrated. And I know in this area, the former mayor of Bayside has been had a crusade to try and do something about it for other sports as well. Can you give us some ideas on what can be done?
Yeah.
And finally, may I just say thank you so much for showing us how to use the microphone. We've been messing around with the microphones down here or even here, but you know what to do. Thank you.
I've had some experience. I've also presented to you before, so I did get feedback that sometimes the guys in the back of the room have trouble hearing.
They still have.
So I'm trying to be clear. So ovals, yeah, it is a challenge for us. One of the things that I'd love to see, so I've got kids in the Bayside area that are in school. One of the things I would love to see is how we can actually collaborate more with schools. But if we leave it up to the club president and the principal of the school, nothing's ever going to happen. They won't agree to anything. But to unlock each of the schools on the weekends, How could a sporting club help maintain the grounds for the school? To be able to unlock those would be tremendous. So I think that may be a little piece that we need to be thinking about. The other thing is as well, is it Elsternwick Golf Course that's going?
Yeah.
Gone to developers. You know, how do we think about with each of these new developments that there are sporting facilities that are committed to in the urban planning process? So whether it's soccer fields or, you know, whether it's rectangle or it's oval, we need to have those. So making sure that government is represented. It doesn't bring money back to, obviously, property developers, but again, it's the right thing to do. So how do we actually influence that? That's part of my job, to be able to agitate and influence and advocate for that.
Nicole, Barry Donaldson.
Hello, Barry.
Sort of, well, some of us were sitting around talking, and we were saying, what
the microphone up, Barry.
What sport?
I think it's gone off now.
Thank you for that. We're talking what sport girls are not involved in or
Yeah.
don't play. And I try to be the smart one in the group. It was precipitated by the VFL and our cricketers and our athletes, our girls. And everybody sort of sat there and looked around for a while, and I thought I'd be smart and said, sumo wrestling. It didn't go over well, but somebody passed their mobile phone around, and here is a Japanese woman sumo wrestling. I'll leave it with you guys to come up with the answer on that.
I don't know that there's too many sports that aren't offering some kind of female programming, even baseball. So softball and baseball, at the Olympic Games in Tokyo, softball has been reintroduced in baseball from a male point of view. But girls are playing baseball and boys are playing softball, so NRLW is around as well, so the Rugby League have got in on the action. They're into their second season, and I firmly believe that they wouldn't have moved that in so quickly if it wasn't for AFLW being in place. Yeah, so girls are having a crack at most things now.
Okay, well, the thing really I wanted to talk about was I always get in early. ACL and hamstrings.
Yep.
Now, we had an international physiotherapist here, does the tennis circuit. And the question was asked, what are the causes of hamstrings and ACLs? And he said, there are several causes. We can't nail them and we can't put out anything in the public sector. Now, you talked about Frawley being in action, about when the girls are playing, what to do to avoid it. To me, it seems, he mentioned preconditioning, and in particular with girls because they've got the different physical facilities. So I don't know what you're doing with that.
Yeah, so it's called Prep to Play, so preparation to play, and it is very much focused on how we can reduce injury because we can't completely get rid of it. So it is a series of activities and exercises to strengthen particular areas in your legs. So we have been researching this now for 4 years through La Trobe University, and Professor Kay Crosley, who is a physiotherapist, obviously is a professor as well now, she's been leading that. And we have a PhD student that by the name of Brooke Patterson, who is a former player for Melbourne Football Club in AFLW, who's done her ACL, and she's doing her PhD in this area. So we are, I think we're well advanced. The FA over in the UK actually have quite good programming for females from a soccer point of view, and I think FIFA also have a program in play. So yeah, I feel like we're doing all right with that. It's just going to take time to actually to put these programs into place and to actually see the physical benefit for our players. But as their technique gets better as well over time, then the twisting motions that potentially increases the risk of ACL, they'll know how to land, they'll know how to take off.
Thank you.
One more? Yes.
Just a point. In the Empire Games times in the 30s, I think the system was against athletes too, in as much as they were training as part of the Empire for 100 yards. Went to the Olympics, 100 metres. And that
Yeah, a lot of those post-war pools have been built, or were built as 50-yard pools. So, yeah.
And the Australian women's champion went to the LA Games, didn't do so well. Empire Games, she did quite well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think Australia's been leading that from a training point of view in recent times with the AIS, you know, flattery or imitation is the best form of flattery. I think most of the world's cotton on that the AIS was something that gave us a distinct advantage from a training point of view, and most countries now have some sort of an institute of sport. So yeah, I think the playing field's been pretty much levelled right around the nation, and it ends up being the investment that governments put into programming that makes the difference. And if we look at prior to Sydney 2000, we were putting a lot of money into sport and Olympic sports, and that's kind of tailed off. And you look at the Brits, who have had an amazing last few Olympic Games, they've had a lot of investment going in. And we'll see the Japanese fly, not only these games, but a couple of games post that, because of the investment that goes into programming. So thank you so much for allowing me to come and spend some time with you. And I look forward to seeing you at a women's football match very soon. Coming to you locally. The Saints are in the competition, so please come down to Moorabbin, to the old ground.
The grand final on Sunday.
And the grand final on Sunday at Princess Park, if you'd like to come along. Yeah, playing in the grand final is Collingwood and the Western Bulldogs, so I'm probably going for the Bulldogs.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Thanks, Nicole. Great speech. If you just retain the position for just a moment, a family friend, if I can call it, Peter Harford would like to just say congratulations and thanks on our behalf.
Yes, Nicole, thanks very much for coming along. You've been here before, I know, and I hope we'll see you again. Other occasions it's been all about swimming, I guess, and I have some very fond memories of watching you at the old Batman Avenue pool with June Jackson. Yep. And you thoroughly disrupted training almost every night, all the time. She'd get out early, do her sats and then stop and then take over. And poor June, he had a lot of trouble with you, but it
paid off in the end.
It paid off in the end, yes. So thank you very much. I should also remember your mother was there. I used to sit up in the stands with her every night. I mean, it was terrific. So thank you very much for coming along and filling us in on women's football. I have to say that with you at the helm, we've got a good organiser, and I know it will go from strength to strength. Now, I also note that you're still on the Swimming Australia board, so we don't want you to lose. We don't want to lose you from that either. So keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.